Well, great. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to talk about bears. I haven't done research in a couple of years. Most of the time recently, I've been a naturalist on board ship on the West Coast, taking people around to see bears up there. So I still keep my oar in on the West Coast. I'm originally a Kingston boy, born and bred, and I live on Wolf Island next to Lisa now. But I thought what I'd do today is have a two-part account of some of my research. I've been working with these things for 35 years, so I can pick and choose. And I'm happy if you want to interrupt or an informal group if you have questions or something like that. But initially I started the work well, I was going to say Alaska, but I actually started grizzly work in Yellowstone. And I just taken a position. I'm an animal behaviorist, and I'll show you a little bit about my area, which is called ethology. But if you want to think of Jane Goodall and her chimpanzees, that's kind of the sort of thing that ethologists do. It's a study of animal behavior, and it's a subtopic in zoology. I have a PhD in zoology from Duke University after I left Queens in biology. And the animal behavior usually covers animal communication, sometimes emotions, culture in animals, how they learn things and pass them on. That's a particular area of interest of mine. I work with big-brained animals. I've worked with dolphins and grizzly bears later. I didn't start out, I actually started out with my PhD on deer, and learning the effects of learning in bears to get along with people, whatever. And just to, at the beginning when I went to Utah State to teach animal behavior, take on graduate students, I went to Yellowstone and had a grizzly bear tearing my face and my scalp off. So I got an early introduction. That's what's with the eye patch. But strange to say, I shortly thereafter took a contract with the Park Service to work with these guys in Katmai National Park. This is a large male, about 8 or 9 or maybe 1,000 pounds in the fall. Look at how fat that guy is. And these bears are the most placid, sort of friendly bears you can imagine. Of course, when I first went there, I thought you just did the stupidest thing on earth to take a contract after you had your face ripped off. I was inches from being killed by a bear on a mountaintop in Yellowstone. And we can talk about that, but I don't want this to be bear stories. You won't be able to sleep tonight if I know that right. But I recovered after a couple months and 900 stitches in my scalp. And I told somebody the other day that I was one of the first people to get a face transplant, but unfortunately they put the same damn face back on me instead of a Hollywood movie star or something like that. But this isn't a very good map. That's the only one I could find. And here's Alaska, and Katmai Park is right on the base of the Alaskan Peninsula, and this is it here. It's a gorgeous mountainous area. It's got volcanic peaks, but it's got a huge number of rivers and lakes that are absolutely full of sockeye salmon, and so it has the highest density of bears in the world, actually, as measured. And the place I'm going to talk about, the research, was in this area here, Brooks Falls. It's a 2-meter falls, and it's been a popular fishing site for big rainbow trout for a long time. Long story short, thousands of people come in there to photograph bears and salmon, and I had a graduate student working there. When she left, there was something like 55 bears walking around within a half a kilometer area. So everywhere you went, you were walking into 500 to 600 pound bears. It takes a while to get used to it, believe me. But the first part of my talk, I wanted to talk about the role of bears in the system. And by this I mean, how do they contribute to the way ecosystems work? And when you think of an ecosystem, you can think of something like an aircraft factory that has energy and parts coming into it, and it's very complex, and you end up with an airplane. Well, in the case of bears, they function in taking salmon out of the river and taking it into the forest, There's something like 135 species of animals that rely on salmon. So wherever you get massive amounts of salmon, you get a really rich group of plants and animals. And I got more interested in this than the first topic that actually the contract with the Park Service was to answer two questions. How safe are these bears for people being around? And with the growing numbers of people, are the bears getting access to the fish? Because if you get aggressive photographers and dozens of people moving in on bears trying to get pictures, then the bears can't do what they want to do. So I took on graduate students to do that. And then after, I guess 10 years, I started to look at all the fish that these guys are eating, and I came up with this format of what the bears do in the system. They're a keystone of some sort, because the salmon are taking the nutrients out of the ocean, they're swimming up the rivers, and then the fish get plastered like fertilizer all over the forest because of the bears. So it's we don't have many of these systems still going on. We've either overfished the salmon or we killed the bears, and we started to tease the richness of the ecosystem apart. But clearly bears transport a lot of nutrients in their feces. Fish bodies are big, their urine is big, and it's mostly nitrogen and phosphorus, which are limiting in forests. There was a study done in the state of Washington that showed that the big Sitka spruce and hemlock trees grow something like 40% bigger and faster when they're on a salmon stream than when they're not. So bears are kind of the Johnny Appleseeds delivering fertilizer through the forest. And that really fascinated me as a process, because as we tear these systems apart, we lose this richness of the whole system. The second one is dispersal of seeds. Bears eat prodigious numbers of seeds, and I'll give you examples of this. And the last, they do a lot of digging and therefore stimulate the forest. I'm kind of talking fast, so if you have questions, break in, feel free. All right, the story of the fish and the nutrients. This is Brooks River in Katmai Park, where we had platforms up in trees. My students and I got up out of the traffic because you had bears coming and going. You couldn't sit there with binoculars and watch things if you were watching your back for a 900-pound bear come along the trail. And this is a photograph I took of sockeye basically panicking in the stream. I couldn't figure out any other way to get an idea how many salmon are in the river, but there might be 80 or 90,000 salmon come up this river, and there are 100 other rivers that have the same sort of situation. So this drainage in Alaska, I think, is the largest salmon fishery, Bristol Bay salmon fishery in the world. It's one of the biggest commercial fisheries. So the bears get access to these fish, mainly at Brooks Falls. And that picture that was on the poster for my talk, that bear was standing right there. In fact, he was doing just that. And this is not an unusual number of bears. They settle themselves out and catch an awful lot of salmon. I watched one bear eat 23 salmon in an hour and a half. And you couldn't get 23 salmon on this table if they were piled up. They just go through a couple of 100,000 calories a day. They're way, they feed like that to put on fat for the winter, for hibernation. So the story I'm going to kind of weave here is the bears' access to the salmon at the lower river, and then up where the bears get them on a spawning stream. The sockeye are going up the river to a lake, and then from the lake they go up a tributary. So the fish are distributed themselves all over the countryside. And these bears memorize all the places where those salmon are, and for 4 months they get access to the same fish. They're just at different stages. I'm not lying, this is all true. This is a map of the river, and we watch the bears at the bottom here. That's where I showed that picture of them all leaping next to the falls. But we mapped all these red lines are bear trails crossing a road. So it gives you an idea of how many bears and how often they're urine, feces, and fish parts. They're catching the fish here, and then they're walking through here. We didn't track these down. It's too scary to go into the woods with all the bears and all the trails. But these were trails that crossed the road. There were 55 of them, which gives you an idea of how the nutrients can be spread around the countryside. And this is the same river. I showed you that bridge area right here with the fish all flopping at the surface, and the falls is right up here. So the bears can get the fish in here. The reason I put this slide on is that it shows you the watersheds way up behind, and that's where those fish are heading. The sockeye have come out of the ocean, crossed Naknek Lake here. They enter here by the tens of thousands, swim up, go into this lake, and sockeye are the only salmon that go to a river first, then a lake, then tributaries. So they need a big landscape and topography like this. And so I went up walking along their trails to see where they were going. And here's the kind of highway you find. This is Swiss Army knife. And this isn't the San Francisco Sierra Club that came through here. This is strictly a bear trail.
Wow.
And it's as wide as bears. Bears being big and fat, they walk like this. They're not like deer that walk like this one after the other, or dogs or Aboriginal people. They walk with their legs like this, and this was about 6 or 8 inches there. So this must be 100, if not 1,000-year-old trail, and it goes right up to the upper rivers where the same fish, now they've changed color, and this is spawning pair. There's the green head on them, and the red bodies, and the bears are getting them again, so they have access to the same salmon that they were trying to get at the falls later on. And here's the way they feed on them. And the salmon early on are pretty much packed with oils, fats, and they go specifically for the skin, which has the fat in it. And they'll eat the brain in the fall when the rest of the body's just like soup. I mean, it's really disgusting. The brain is intact, because it's the computer and it doesn't lose its fat. And the brain is about 65% lipids, fats. And the bears munch that like Mars bars. They just love them. And here's later in the season now, the end of this story of the bears doing so well on the salmon is that when the salmon die, after they spawn, they all die, and the bears then get access to the carcasses, and they slurp these guys up. And they're so common on the sides of the river that you could almost step on salmon all the way up and down the river. They're just, the numbers are unbelievable. And this is the result of eating all those salmon. You see there's a salmon on the shore here, and these guys would actually go out in the surf. I don't think I got a picture here, but you can see the waves coming in, and they go out through the surf, and they're kicking up fish from the bottom. So they've learned a dozen different places to catch fish, which is the culture that they're doing. So that's kind of that story, which is pretty interesting. It just happened that I came into this one park, that it turns out there are very few other places in the world that have this many salmon in so many places, and that accounts for these bears are about 100 times as dense as in the mountains of Yellowstone or Banff or Jasper or Yoho or Kalani Park or any of those places. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the bears being Johnny Appleseed, spreading seeds over the countryside. This is one bear poop on the beach, and I saw this and I thought, I didn't think immediately of making a pie out of it. I was still working as a scientist. But turns out that I think I sampled this. I didn't count them all, but there are about 3,000 berries in that, and they've gone through a bear. And people would come up to me and say, Dr. Science, why are all these berries coming through the bear? Why do they bother eating them if they're going to poop them out? And I went into the literature and saw how many hours bears feed in a day, and it turns out that they're eating about 200,000 berries a day, and this is about 3% of what they actually put in their mouth. They're eating these low bush cranberries so fast that they don't crunch them all, and the berries have a little waxy surface on them, so they're going right through the bears.
Wow.
And this was just what was left. So you can imagine the number of seeds that would be left there. And when they go through the forest, of course, they're planting seeds, which is what the bears eat. Nice story. I only saw this once, so this is a bit of an exaggeration, but I lie about the fish I catch, and I'm going to lie about the berries too. The third item on that was bears digging and moving soil around. And I read an account by I guess he was a geologist, but he said that in his studies it wasn't earthworms or prairie dogs or any burrowing rodent, it's bears that turn over more soil. And it turns out this was in Colony Park, and this is just digging for rodents, but of course they dig for all kinds of animals. They dig for roots, and then they dig dens. I don't think I got a den picture. No, this is a student from University of Washington who's looked at bear digging, and she was interested in glacier lilies, and she found that bears would find a whole patch of glacier lilies. They eat the root of it. It's kind of like a piece of potato, and it's very nutritious. And she thought that maybe the bear would be destroying the lilies, but it turned out that where the bears were digging, the glacier lilies were twice as productive. They had twice the number of seeds that were set and twice the number of flowers. All that disturbance of the soil released nitrogen, and the bears were basically gardening. Where they dig up the glacier lilies, they get better food the next year. So that was pretty impressive too. I get pretty excited about grizzly bears, what they do on the landscape. We could also talk later, I won't go into their physiology, but they're the only species that can go and rest in a cave and not lose any bone out of their bone structure. If you and I go into the hospital and we're in a bed for 3 weeks, we're dumping bone calcium like mad. And if you go into space, the same thing happens. And if you are in a space without exercising or any pressure for a couple of months, your bones will break when you come back to Earth because they've dumped so much calcium. Bears have figured out, however, their physiology, that they don't do that. And they also don't urinate or defecate for 6 months at a time. So they have a way of recycling their nitrogen. You and I would turn yellow in about 5 days if our kidneys shut down. And that's the famous Dr. Barrie Gilbert in his little site. That's the way we did our studies with spotting scopes. And this was an old tower I found in the forest that was used for hydrology, and I pulled it out and put it up. I kind of got to like that place. Now, the other part of my talk is about the growth of ecotourism and people everywhere in Alaska coming in to watch bears. And I was involved in this myself, as I mentioned, in the last 10, 15 years on board boats along the coast. But people fly in from all over the place, and these are non-guided people. These guys with the biggest lenses in the world got right down in the face of these bears. I don't know whether they were taking pictures of ticks on their nose or what they were taking pictures of. But now this is back to Katmai again. This shows you a bear early in the year. It looks more like a wolf. This bear hasn't had any salmon, and bears like this kind of scare me because I tend to look like a hamburger, I think, with these guys. But you can see the difference in coming in and getting salmon and how important it is. I think this is a subadult that was low on the pecking order, but he doesn't have any extra fat. Now here's another, this is on the coast of British Columbia where I did the last of my work with bears taking salmon in the forest. And this is a guy that takes people up to a refuge. And this is what you see along the Kootzmatine. This is a famous estuary. Almost in Alaska, you're on the coast of British Columbia. And they feed on grasses completely in the springtime before the salmon come in. So it's a strange ability to digest basically sedge or grass and then switch to salmon. People say they're omnivores. Well, Actually, most bears are as carnivorous as they can be, but they spend a lot of time eating plants because that's all they have available to them. But if you walked around here, you'd swear there are a herd of horses somewhere because there's this horse manure everywhere, but it's from the bears, these big piles of half-digested grass. And the native guys, this is Governor Robinson, and he takes people in to see the white spirit bears, which is a white-black bear. It's just a coat with the variant of the black bear. And there's one there. White bears aren't any better than black bears. Black is beautiful. So, but they are unusual. They're not albinos. They're just a colored area, like a black lab or a chocolate lab. It's definitely a genetic trait. That's about 20% of the bears are white. And this is part of the graph from my student Tamara Olson. She worked on her thesis here, master's thesis, and then she stayed on as the park biologist. But I threw this in because it's the July bears, and their sex and ages here. It doesn't matter, but look at the growth of the number of bears. As the number of people went up, people say, well, the bears are going to disappear, and they're all being disturbed, and they're harassed, and all these people shouldn't mess with the bears, let them be. Well, the more people there were, the more bears there were. And I don't know what accounts for that, except the bears are accommodating to people. They're highly habituated. You could have one walk in the back door here and walk around and walk out the front door and hardly blink. They're so accustomed to people. And especially the big males. I think these are adult males. They're very common here. They're shot in a lot of other places, but here they've been protected for 100 years. And the bears are totally accommodated to people, I think. This is another lodge that's a floating lodge, and people are taken in to see bears at a viewing site. This is one way to go and see them in the marshes. You go up the rivers and just climb out and hold the boat, and people photograph the bears like this. This is kind of unusual because this is a mom with 4 youngsters, which is quite unusual, but shows how productive. Most grizzlies have 1 or 2 young. 1.7 is about the average. But when you get on the coast, triplets aren't that unusual. The female is quite fat and nutritious, and she can provide milk for 3 cubs or 4 cubs. This is one of the few times we got out of our viewing stand. This is where the tourists come, and this is where the bears catch the salmon at this salmon weir. There's an artificial spawning area that the government built in here. But we were darting bears, and I'm only carrying the gun in case one of the students acts up and I should have to shoot him. But we were going around darting bears on the ground there, which is, I don't collar bears. I was doing observation, but there was my student had an opportunity because the lodge owner wanted to find out where the bears were going. He was fighting timber companies from cutting down all the trees in the area, so we put satellite collars on the bears. But see how comfortable these bears are with us there? We've walked across that area and we're standing there, and they're not upset at all. Well, this is kind of an interesting sequence. One of the rangers, a gal that worked at this place, took this series of pictures, and number 1 here is a female bear with her cub coming along this road to the viewing stand, and this guy flew in and decided he was going to be a National Geographic photographer, and he was going to just sit on the ground and photograph bears on the ground. It's not allowed, nobody likes that sort of thing. So he sees this bear coming, and he goes into a little catatonic trance here because he's awful close to this big mom. And she smells his backpack, and then she smells his tripod. He's still rigid, and then she looks at him here, and I'll show you that picture in the next slide. She lifts her right paw, which is about the size of a frying pan, ready to drop kick his head into the next county. And then she decides, the heck with it, I'm out of here, and she just turned around and walked away, and the guy's still the same way. But look at her here. Ears and her teeth are about 18 inches from his ear. And she's got the right paw cocked as though to say, I don't like this at all. And then bingo, she said, two weird for me kids were in here. And she turned right around and walked away. And to me, that was kind of the graphic example of how the bears make the decisions. They're not all this, they're not like a crocodile in the woods that just chomp their way through people. Some people they do. But in the end, here are the three things they talked about for this animal. It used to be that people would say, oh, it doesn't matter about the grizzlies, kill the grizzlies, something else will take their place, or whatever they eat will just go through detrital chains and end up going back into the ecosystem. But it turns out, bear being as big as he is, walks long distances, so the physical size is important because he's not only taking his body, which will die in a distant place, but all the fish parts and everything else that they cart around, plus the bear feces and urine that are going everywhere. So they're basically spreading nutrients all throughout the forest, which is a pretty important area. Function. And then if you think of seed dispersal with avalanches and floods and all this sort of thing, they're also a seed disperser too. And then there's the digging that they do as well. Now another interesting feature of their ecology is that you have to have enough of them, as with wolves, to function in the system. It isn't good enough to have tokenism. You can say, oh yeah, we got bears in Banff Park, but there are only 16 of them. Well, you say, well, functionally, that's not important at all, because there are not enough of them to do what bears do in that system. Just same as if you had a half dozen wolves, they're not going to have the same effect on the prey base. So it's important not only to have these large carnivores, but to have them in natural numbers, traditional, historic numbers, in order for them to have this ecological function. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Another spirit bear, people just go gaga to get a photograph of these bears. But you can't have it. And I did this for a talk I gave in Wrangell, Alaska. Lessons learned from bear viewing. It's safe for people, and it isn't bad on the bears if we're quiet and loud and are predictable in our patterns. The bears will learn what we do as long as we do it the same way all the time. And it doesn't matter, I won't go through all of this, but people should be with guides and be up in the air and stay away from the bears. There are a lot of good examples of how you can do bear viewing, just like observing animals in Africa. If you do it the right way from Land Rovers and whatever, it isn't having a negative effect. If you chase down all the cheetahs with your Land Rover to get pictures, then the cheetahs aren't hunting, and they're going to be they'll be disturbed in a very short while. This was a river just north of where I'd done my research, and my wife Kathy and I went up there and in a couple of boats. And you can see how excited people are. All these people have paid to come in there, and this is one of the guides. They're focused on a bear on the shore. But it's a safe way to do it. It's comfortable. The guides take you to where the bears are, and then you go back and eat good food. I don't need to do that one. This is out on the coast, the most recent trip I took. I had a student from Royal Roads College that was working in Katmai. She's both Canadian and American, and she was doing a research on the coast on bear viewing. And so we spent a couple of days on this river, very remote outer coast of Katmai. It was beautiful. And we went fishing, and I caught a 100-pound halibut one day. Was it ever fun? And this is the kind of thing you see. I love that picture. That's about it.
Was that a real picture or a Photoshop?
The cubs?
Yeah.
Oops, sorry. Oh, I went the wrong way on that. That was a picture I lifted off the web, but that was at Brooks Camp, and it was a couple of cubs that just having a little play fight, but it looks like a duel of some sort. It was really, I was really taken with the expressions. Let's see if I can find it again.
There.
Yeah.
They look like someone in a bear costume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see why native people thought that bears were people, but they're very close, and of course they learn a lot. Bears are smart in what they do, but look at this sort of look on this thing. You know, don't you dare hit me. He says, I'm gonna knock your ear off here, buddy. The little toe is up like he's gonna walk in and do it. It'd make a great book cover.
It would.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful.
The one on the right has been taking karate lessons.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's great. Any questions on anything at all? We'll be happy to try and answer. Any?
Next to you, on that side.
Oh, yeah.
The bears take the fish and then go into the forest to eat them, and then the fish fertilize the tree.
Yeah, that's, a lot of bears take them to the forest. The big dominant bears eat them right in the river, so they're not carting the fish. But all those trails I showed you crossing the road, they're either bears taking fish someplace, or after they've eaten all day long, they go and sleep in the woods because they want to get away from other bears. The bears are actually more fearful of other bears than they are of people. So they all have their own little resting areas in the woods. But wherever they go, of course they're eating fish and then moving into the forest and leaving fish parts there, and then the worms break down the fish parts or bones or whatever. And of course the bear's body, you gotta think in terms of hundreds of years, eh? The bears are dying in the forest, so all the nutrients of their body go into the trees too. So the whole thing is very rich and complex, but it takes time, of course. You know, one of the fundamental questions you'd ask about places that have rich forests is if the rivers take all the nutrients down into the ocean, then after a million years, all the nutrients should be in the ocean, and there's nothing left but deserts and mountains on the shore. Well, the fish are one of the things. They're basically a care package that swims upstream and gives their body to the ecosystem, and the bears tow that into the forest, and the eagles do, and the otters do, and all the 100 or so species. And the same thing you could make a case in the marine zone, where you have killer whales and seals feeding on the fish there, and they're distributing the nutrients. But it isn't quite like the forest, because of course you got to go uphill in the forest, and the trees are limited by nitrogen and phosphorus. So I once asked a forester friend of mine how important the bears might be, and he said it sounds like the nutrients are exactly what a forester would use if he were artificially fertilizing using helicopters. Well, the bears are doing it forest free, so that's a service they're providing us. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I've enjoyed most about your talk is that, you know, there's so much in the news about land management and land claims and forest management and resources and, you know, all these things. And it's such a great reminder that nature has this perfect way of rejuvenating itself and balancing, you know, and we don't talk about that anymore.
Salmon will go on for another 1,000 years if we live that long, and we can keep using some of them, but if we overfish it, it's gone, you know. And it's interesting you bring that up, because I've been thinking a lot about these pesticides, neonicotinoids, that they're using on corn and soy, and they're absolutely destroying the honeybees and a lot of the native bees, because it's a systemic pesticide that goes up into the plant, and it goes into the flower, and it goes into the pollen, and it's devastating. Well, bees, I'm sorry, but 75% of what we eat has to be pollinated by some kind of bee. So that isn't very smart either, but boy, the pesticide companies and the agricultural people are fighting like hell to keep that, because they get higher dollar for their corn and soy, but it won't last because they're hurting the other agricultural people. Yeah, there's a lot that goes on that we rely on. We forget that the system has to be kept intact. If you start using your hard drive as a doorstop, then your computer won't work too well either. And we do that to the natural system with gay abandon, because again, there's so much profit in it. But that'll be my next talk.
In your opinion, what are the biggest threats to the maintenance of that system?
The biggest threats? I would say commercial salmon fishing, because if you reduce the stock of commercial salmon, then it doesn't get to the rivers. But I was told, for one thing, the state of Alaska manages their fishery better than anybody else in the world, and ever since the state took over from the federal government in about 1910, and now there's a salmon in the rivers in Alaska keep going up. And Alaska won't allow net pen fisheries, they don't do any fish farming, it's outlawed. BC does it, and it's gonna hammer the fishery in BC. So, as long as you keep, and the offshore fishery, apparently the Asian countries aren't fishing out the salmon in the ocean, it's just too big and they don't get access. So the salmon are really doing quite well. The worst things we can do is cut down the forests and then destroy the streams. And that's what happened at that place where you saw me standing with the shotgun. They built that whole spawning channel because the foresters had stripped the trees off and ruined the sockeye fishery, so they substituted a pink salmon fishery. That it was working, but nobody seemed to want to catch pink salmon. They had something like 60 to 80,000 salmon coming in there, and many more than the spawning channel would take, but the bears are taking them. And that resort, the owner of it grosses about $3 million a year on people coming in to stay at his lodge. So bear viewing in British Columbia earns something like 12 times the hunting of grizzly bears. Big fight on, they still hunt grizzly bears in British Columbia, and then environmentalists are trying to shut it down. But the hunting fraternities, the guide outfitter associations are fighting to keep bear hunting going, because they'll get $20,000 to $30,000 a hunt. But you can't, you know, you kill a bear once and it's gone. You can photograph a bear 1,000 times. So bear viewing doesn't destroy the resource, bear hunting destroys the resource.
Intuitively, I feel that salmon farming is not a good thing. How does it?
Salmon farming has a number of negatives. They have a parasite that gets on the fish, a little skin parasite that, what's it called?
Something lice?
Lice, yeah, sea lice.
Yeah.
They get off and get on the young fish that are coming out of the rivers, the native fish, so that's a negative. The amount of feed and feces from these are highly concentrated, destroys the ground and the marine life under the fish pens, and some of these fish escape, and they could be setting up hybrid fish on the coast, which people have threatened to buy. So they're trying to get the net pen fishery to go on shore, but the economics of that I don't think works. You know, when you can put a net pen out there, you got oxygen, you got nutrients coming and going with the tides, so you'd think it'd be pretty good. But unfortunately, both in Chile and Norway and Canada, the fish food that they give them has a fair bit of noxious chemicals in it. So if you buy farmed salmon, which is what you'll get in any restaurant, unless it's said wild salmon, you're eating somewhat toxic fish based on the food that it's fed. I don't think it's a big problem. The fish at Lake Ontario are a lot more toxic than any fish farmed salmon. But it's a matter of, I think, an independent company owns those salmon, whereas the fishermen have to use the public resource. And there's a lot more profit, of course, with pen salmon because they raise them year-round. Salmon is a seasonal food, except from a net pen. And then you got it 12 months a year. You know, Walmart's loves it because they get salmon every day of the year, and they're all so-called fresh. So
I guess it's a good thing that Alaska doesn't allow farming, because we could get the canned salmon,
yes,
the wild salmon from
Yeah.
Alaska.
Yeah.
That's,
and you get excellent flash frozen salmon coming from
Yeah,
Alaska.
yeah,
Copper
yeah.
River salmon goes at something like $25 a pound in San Francisco. Some people have said that we really ought to be promoting the sport fishery and get rid of the commercial fishery because so many people love to catch salmon and eat them. But, you know, when you catch a salmon and eat it, you paid about $400 for your fish, so not everybody can do that. Any other comments or questions? If anybody wants to do research on salmon and bears, I'll tell you some places to go if you want to switch your major.
Anything else?
It's a different You mentioned about animal communication. What, like, how do bears communicate? Do they function very much as a group? Or are they really, they're frightened of each other if
yeah.
they're smaller?
They're fairly solitary, except mothers and cubs are together for a couple of years at least, sometimes 3 years.
Okay.
And the cub is learning all the tricks that mom has, the places. She's got a nail rope, or she takes the kid to eat, to
Right.
hundreds of places where to find things. And the cub is learning that, so there's a huge amount of communication going on there. Adult bear to adult bear have a lot of postures, vocalizations, and all that. I haven't done, nobody's done anything really completely on bear communication. But they're very much like big dogs, only I think even smarter because of the numbers of things they do. They've got one of the biggest brains of all the carnivores, and the part of the cerebral cortex that's devoted to smell is the largest in proportion to brain size. So these guys, you know, they could probably smell a mouse a meter down in the snow without a problem. And their sensory ability is spectacular. Of course, they're a great medical model for kidney function and this bone loss. How they prevent bones from degrading is amazing. They haven't solved that one, but it's probably some genetic hormonal system of some sort. They apparently recycle all the nitrogen, all the kidney nitrogen that we pee out from their bladder gets taken back in. They don't lose any muscle mass when they're hibernating, and they're in a cave for 6 months. So, and they're not really hibernating. They don't get cold like ground squirrels do. Ground squirrel, you keep one in your fridge and you can take it out and set it on the table and put it back in for the next couple of months, and it's rigid. But bears are breathing just like they normally do, only slower, and their heart is slowed down a bit. But they're using up a lot of fat, and when they use the fat, they get the moisture out of the fat, and they're blowing off CO2. So they don't. They basically are sitting there with their fuel tank running down all winter long.
What time of the year do they mate?
From some as early as May, but mostly in July, and there's delayed implantation once the fertilized zygote goes to a four-cell stage, and then floats around in the uterus for a couple months until February, and then it starts to implant if the female is fat enough. If she's not fat enough, it gets squashed out. But the young are born, the smallest of any mammal, I believe that's true. Grizzly bear mom that weighs 600 pounds has a 1.5 to 2 pound pup.
Wow.
And it does most of its growth after. I don't know what the evolutionary explanation for that is. But,
Barrie, with such abundance of food for these groups anyway in Alaska, is there sort of minimal aggression between members
exactly,
then
that's a good point
because of the
that I didn't
competition?
stress. Yeah, the fact of all the salmon makes them very accommodating to one another. They just don't compete, they spend their time feeding. You know, if we were all hungry, but you had 6 tables full of T-bone steaks, the non-vegetarians would be after that. You wouldn't be fighting over it. There's so much you know, have lots to eat. And some people have said that's probably the reason why they're so accommodating to people on the coast.
Yeah.
They really don't bother fishing or anything else. You go to Yosemite, they're a lot more tripwired. The bear I ran into didn't want me to be anywhere around. I was 9,000 foot on the top of the mountain, and I frightened the bear. Actually, the bear didn't attack me, I attacked the bear, but it defended itself better than I did. But it was just a surprise encounter. And, that's what they're like. They're intolerant of things coming close to them, mostly because I think it was a female with a cub that I approached, and she was very, very angry. And she let me know in a hurry.
Wow. Are there many instances of attacks
Relatively
by
rare,
bears?
but most of the, if you call them attacks, interactions, bites, slaps, whatever, do occur in the Rockies because the bears don't like people there. It's very hard to get close to them. You don't get where I was in Brooks Falls, we had 55 bears. In the last 45 to 50 years, there hasn't been anyone injured. And that's thousands of people within 50 yards of all these bears. They just ignore them. They treat people like another magpie. They just walk by them. And on occasion, like with Timothy Trenwell, he was killed and his girlfriend on the coast. But he stayed late, and it was an old bear, and the old bears that don't like people are really nasty. Bears kill each other and eat them. I watched a video of the big male bear eating the back out of a living bear in the river. It scared the hell out of all the people that were on the viewing stand. They just freaked out, and they called for rangers with guns and everything, because everybody says, you're looking at bears all day, oh, they're so cute, look at them catch the fish, and then this big male comes along and tears big chunks out of the back of this. He basically ate this other bear alive, and people went ballistic, you know. But, you know, I make the case too. Are people dangerous? You're damn right they are. Some of them are real dangerous. So you can't generalize. Most people aren't dangerous to other people, and most bears aren't dangerous to people. But you get the right condition, and you got canines like this and claws like this, they can do a little damage. Even if they're snapping at you, they can do a lot of